Imagine this. Your neighbor, let's call him Jim, wins the lottery. Not a life-changing, multi-million-dollar jackpot, but a solid six-figure win. He buys a brand new, shiny red truck, puts in a fancy new pool, and starts taking his family on expensive vacations. You're happy for Jim, right? You should be. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Jim's good fortune might be the single biggest threat to your own financial stability. It sounds crazy. How can someone else's money affect your bank account? It's not like Jim is stealing from you. But a few years ago, a team of economists found something shocking. They studied lottery winners and their neighbors, and what they discovered was a direct, measurable link. For every $1,000 a neighbor won, the probability of the people next door declaring bankruptcy went up by 2.4%. Think about that. Your neighbor gets rich, and you get poor. Why does this happen? Why are we so easily drawn into a financial arms race we can't afford to win? This isn't a story about jealousy. It's a story about a powerful, invisible force that shapes our economy and our lives: social comparison. We're going to explore the Joneses effect, the hidden economic engine that drives us to spend money we don't have on things we don't need just to keep up with a standard that keeps moving. We'll look at the data behind the lottery neighbor paradox, dive into the simple psychology that makes us vulnerable, and see how the rise of social media has turned our quiet neighborhood into a global, high-pressure competition. By the end of this, you'll understand why the finish line in the race for enough keeps moving, and how you can finally choose to step off the track. Section 1. The Lottery Neighbor Paradox. Let's go back to Jim and his new red truck. The study I mentioned, done by economists at the Federal Reserve, is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence we have for the keeping up with the Joneses effect. They looked at data from a Canadian province where lottery winners are publicly announced. This created a perfect real-world experiment. The researchers found that when a neighbor won a significant amount of money, the people living closest to them started borrowing more money. They took out bigger mortgages, bought more expensive cars, and increased their credit card debt. And the larger the prize, the more likely the neighbors were to eventually file for bankruptcy. So why does this happen? The answer is simple: visibility. You don't see Jim's bank account. You don't see his investment portfolio. You see his new driveway, his new boat, and the expensive renovation he just finished. These are what economists call conspicuous consumption. They're loud, public signals of wealth. And when you see them, your brain doesn't think, "good for Bob." It thinks, "wait, if Jim can afford that, why can't I?" The problem is you're only seeing the surface. You're comparing your entire financial reality, your income, your savings, your debt, to a single, polished image of his new life. And that comparison is powerful enough to make you change your own behavior, often for the worse. Section 2. The Psychology of the Joneses. So why are we wired this way? The answer lies in a simple idea from social psychology called social comparison theory, first proposed by Leon Festinger in the 1950s. The core idea is that humans have a basic drive to evaluate themselves. We want to know if we're doing well, if we're normal, and if we're successful. But how do you measure success? There's no objective scale. So we look around. We compare ourselves to others. There are two types of comparison: upward and downward. Downward comparison is when you look at someone doing worse than you. This usually makes you feel better about your own situation. At least I'm not that bad off. Upward comparison is when you look at someone doing better than you, like Jim with his new truck. This is the dangerous one. It can be motivating, pushing you to work harder, but more often it leads to a feeling called relative deprivation. You might be objectively wealthy. You have a safe home, a good job, and food on the table. But when you compare yourself to Jim, you feel deprived. You feel like you're falling behind. The Joneses effect is just relative deprivation applied to your wallet. It's the feeling that your life, your house, or your car is suddenly not enough simply because someone else has something newer or bigger. The goal isn't to be rich. The goal is to be richer than the people around you, and that is a race with no finish line.
Section 2. The Digital Neighborhood. For most of human history, the Joneses were literally your neighbors. They were the 5 or 10 families on your street. Their wealth was limited by the size of their house and the car in their driveway, but that world is gone. Today, the Joneses live on your phone. Social media, Instagram, TikTok, even LinkedIn, has created a digital neighborhood where your peers aren't just the people next door. They're influencers, celebrities, and even people you went to high school with, who now seem to be living a permanent vacation. This has created a new psychological phenomenon some call money dysmorphia. You know what body dysmorphia is, seeing a distorted, negative image of your body in the mirror. Money dysmorphia is the same thing, but for your finances. You're comparing your messy, complicated, behind-the-scenes financial reality, the bills, the debt, the early mornings, to everyone else's perfectly curated highlight reel. You see the luxury watch, but not the credit card bill. You see the exotic vacation, but not the second job they took to pay for it. The problem is that the sheer volume of upward comparison is overwhelming. You're no longer competing with Jim. You're competing with a million Jims, all of whom look richer, happier, and more successful than you. This constant global comparison has raised the bar for what is considered normal so high that it's become financially impossible for most people to reach. Section 4. Positional Goods and the Hedonic Treadmill. Why do we keep buying things that don't actually make us happier? This brings us to 2 more key concepts, positional goods and hedonic treadmill. First, positional goods. These are things that are valued not for their function, but for their scarcity and the status they convey. A cheap watch tells the time just as well as a $10,000 Rolex, but the Rolex is a positional good. Its value comes from the fact that most people can't have it. It signals your position in society. The problem is that when everyone starts buying a positional good, it loses its power. When Jim buys a new truck, and then you buy a new truck, and then everyone on the street buys a new truck, the truck is no longer a status symbol. It just becomes the new baseline. This leads us directly to the hedonic treadmill. This is the idea that humans quickly adapt to new levels of pleasure or consumption. That new car smell, it fades. The excitement of the new pool, it becomes just the pool. You get a raise, you buy a bigger house, and for a few months you're happier. But then your brain adapts. Your new higher standard of living becomes your new normal. And to feel that initial rush of happiness again, you need to buy something even bigger, even better. You're running on a treadmill, constantly exerting effort just to stay in the same place, financially and emotionally. It's an arms race of consumption where the only winner is the credit card company. Section 5. Common Misconceptions. At first, this sounds logical, but you might wonder, I'm not trying to impress anyone. I just like nice things. I'm rewarding myself for my hard work. This is the most common misconception. We tell ourselves we're buying for internal satisfaction, but often the underlying motivation is external validation. Think about it. If you truly didn't care what anyone thought, would you buy the same car? Would you take the same vacation? Would you post the same photos? The difference between a reward and a status signal is subtle but critical. A reward is a one-time celebration. A status signal is a permanent, expensive commitment. When you buy a house that stretches your budget, you're not just rewarding yourself. You're buying into a neighborhood, a school district, and a lifestyle that requires you to keep spending to maintain the signal. The flaw in the logic is that the people you are trying to impress are often too busy trying to impress their own Joneses to even notice you. You are sacrificing your financial future for an audience that isn't paying attention. Consequences. So what happens if this system continues unchanged? The consequences are far more serious than just a little debt. First is the invisible bankruptcy. This is the person who looks rich on paper, high income, expensive house, luxury car, but has zero net worth. They are one missed paycheck, one medical emergency, or one interest rate hike away from disaster. They are high income, high debt, and completely fragile. Second is the massive mental health cost. The constant pressure to perform, to signal success, and to keep up with an ever-rising standard leads to chronic anxiety, burnout, and a deep sense of inadequacy. You are sacrificing your peace of mind for a fleeting moment of external approval. Finally, there is the systemic cost. When an entire society is driven by debt-fueled consumption, it creates economic instability. The Joneses effect is not just a personal finance problem, it's a driver of consumer debt and a symptom of a system that profits from your insecurity.